All right. So I am looking at the results of this vote and thinking, oh no, oh no, oh yes, oh yes. And that's when I realized this team was the exact wrong team to be making the decision. I'm Jeremy Utley, and by day I'm a professor at Stanford University, but by night I'm an insurance dude.
Insurance dudes are on a mission to escape being handcuffed by our agencies.
How? By uncovering the secrets to creating a predictable, consistent, and profitable agency sales machine.
I am Craig Pretzinger.
I am Jason Feldman.
We are agents.
We are insurance dudes.
Love it. Boom. Welcome.
Boom. Welcome to the show. So for folks that aren't familiar with you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to being a professor?
I want to know the rest of the story.
Oh,
Craig.
well,
You're
right.
Hey,
You did do
you guys
drop a hook.
I'll follow you either direction.
I was gonna go in a little, then weave the hook, then come back to it.
I don't think you
in
were.
Classic storytelling form.
Yeah.
Why don't we finish the
I
story?
believe him.
That's fine.
I believe him. So I'm Jeremy Utley, co-author of Ideaflow, the only business metric that matters, which was recently, actually a cool story. Just last week was named by Thinkers 50, one of the top 10 innovation books. It's very exciting. And I've been teaching at Stanford University for the last 15 years or so, leading executive programs and entrepreneurial accelerator and leadership labs for students from business school, medical school, law school, engineering, and then professionals that want to bring some of the stuff that we call design thinking into their organizations. And the moment that I brought you into was a moment at the faded Silicon Valley Bank where a group of high-performing leaders that we had brought together were pitching their innovation ideas to a particular team. And I realized the team who was selecting the ideas was completely unequipped to make the best decision.
Talk more about that.
Yeah. So basically what we do when we go into organizations is we're seeking to build capacity. You think about innovation, not so much as an event like a hackathon or a sprint where it's like, we get the idea, then it's back to business. We think about innovation as it's a capacity that you have to build. It's not only an individual capacity, but it's an organizational capacity. And so we teach students at Stanford, grad students at Stanford primarily, but then we get brought into organizations to cultivate that capacity in the organization. And years ago, Greg Becker, who's a CEO of Silicon Valley Bank, had brought us in to do that. And he had said, hey, I want you to work with my 30 kind of senior most leaders who report into the C-suite, where we want to develop them as high potential leaders. We've got 9 or 10 different strategic areas of inquiry, and we'd like for them to use the process that you've pioneered at Stanford. So let's choose one of the projects as kind of a learning vehicle. I think we chose something like debt financing for startups. Everybody admitted, hey, we got to reinvent this thing. Let's all in parallel, and that's something we can come back to if you want, but basically 9 teams in parallel, all trying to solve that problem. And then at the end of 2 or 3 days, we're going to pitch solutions we've co-developed with entrepreneurs to the team that's responsible for shepherding this work forward. Now, that's the exact wrong team to be making the selection. And there's a lot of cognitive bias at play, which we can nerd out however much you want to. But the basic gist is there were, call it a spectrum of with any portfolio, right? There's a spectrum of outcomes. There's some kind of wacky stuff. There's some low hanging fruit, obvious stuff. There's some really high potential, but potentially a little bit more risky stuff that comes out of these 9 teams. And I had pulled the members of the kind of startup debt financing team out of their respective teams we had mixed them up into to be the jury, and they're going to select the ideas to move forward with. You think this is obvious, right? They're the people whose job it is to do this stuff. And I'm watching it. Having done this for a bunch of years, I kind of have a little bit of an intuitive sense of what is high potential, what's not, et cetera. And I'm watching the jurors, and my first thought as they're grading the 9 ideas in the portfolio, honestly, my first thought, guys, was they don't understand the grading criteria.
Because of the new...
They don't speak English. It's like, it was so backwards. I'm like, surely there's something wrong because they're selecting the worst ideas, right? Objectively, and I'm objective in this situation, the worst ideas. And then I realized, no, this is going to be awesome. Because rather than rescue them, I'm just going to bring them in and we're going to unveil the winner.
Make the train wreck happen or watch it happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's my job. I'm basically like, I'm not a train conductor. I'm a train wrecker, right? so we come into the room, there, all of the leaders there, all of the senior leadership team, Greg Becker, the former now CEO, was there. And I say, all right, folks, jury, let's hear what the two ideas that you selected are. And they say the two ideas, and there's just, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And I said, actually, real quick, would you raise your hand? Just raise it high if you would have selected either of these two ideas. Nobody in the entire room raised their hand. And one of the members of the debt financing team goes, are you serious? And then multiple people in the crowd go, are you serious? Wow. And it was just this amazing moment where you realize the people whose job it is to innovate are not the people who can select the most innovative idea, because they're thinking in terms of, is it doable? Is it going to meet our budget? Does it align with what we already think the answer is, right? All this stuff. And so they bring all of those biases to the selection moment, and they're fundamentally the wrong people to be making the selection.
It is the epitome of putting the round peg in the square box, right? Like they're Absolutely. In a square, and you're talking entrepreneurs. Bank is just, as soon as bank's involved, it's just like
they can't do it. They can't do it. But I mean, I can't tell you all the. I mean, I remember. I'll tell you another story, just for kicks. Maybe 2012, we're working with one of the world's largest hospitality companies in the hotel space, thousands of locations around the world, which now it's like one of 5 people. And we're standing with the senior management team talking about our kind of area of expertise, which is disruptive innovation. And the chairman of the board, and mind you, this is now 12 years ago. So if I look young now, imagine how I looked then. He patronizingly put his arm around me and said, Jeremy, I don't think you understand. We haven't had a disruptive innovation in hospitality in 50 years. And I had happened to just randomly, as it were, I had checked Wall Street Journal earlier that day, and Airbnb had just closed a round of fundraising for something like a valuation of like $12 billion. This company, the entire company, was valued at a fraction of that. And I said to the chairman of the board, I said, what about Airbnb? And do you know what he said? That's not a hospitality company.
That's like Blockbuster saying Netflix isn't a movie company.
They're not a movie company. Yeah, they're not a rental company, right? And we find ways to conveniently define our market in a way that we're the only one, right? And that's part of kind of the institutional bias. But anyway, Ideaflow is largely about our adventures and misadventures trying to drive innovation in organizations. Thankfully, we've had some successes too. But what you see is human beings, with all of our faults and cognitive bias and things like that, you bring a bunch of people together. It doesn't make us better sometimes. It actually just amplifies some of that underlying stuff. And you read a bunch of that in the pages of the book.
Oh, I love it. What an interesting conversation. Our audience is primarily, we have an awesome community of insurance agents. And I think a lot of times the insurance business as a whole gets stuck in a box. Yeah. And even our agencies, we get kind of like in a box too, the way things that were done and the way things always have been. So it's really hard when we're talking about innovation in general to just think outside the box. Think about, hey, just because it's been done this way doesn't mean like this is the only way. Like, what about all these other things that are happening?
Right. Well, and what I would say there, just to kind of put a fine point on what you're saying, is when the world is static, expertise is an asset. Mm-hmm. When the world is changing, expertise becomes a liability. And what most folks don't appreciate is the extent to which the world is changing, right? And so what you see, like one of my favorite examples of this historically, I'm a super nerd. You have to be to be a professor at Stanford. And so I read a lot. And things that I love is the story of the skunk works at Lockheed Martin. So this is like, they're responsible for tons of the big time innovation in aviation over the last, half century. And famously, in the kind of Cold War era, the US government was seeking to develop a aircraft which had a lower radar signature. The problem is, we're flying bombers over, and the USSR is really gifted at shooting down are bombers. And so we need a lower radar signature. And there's not a lot of progress with kind of conventional approaches. Well, this young guy, Dennis Overhauser, reads an obscure Russian math paper that the Russians hadn't bothered reading. It had been out for over 10 years. Overhauser reads it and he tells Ben Rich, who's running Skunkworks, it seems like there are formulas in this paper that would inform a new design. Do I have permission to explore a new design? Ben Rich, it's a young guy, he's relatively, which is to say his time's not super expensive. All right, have at it. So he takes like 6 months and he comes out with what would become the stealth bomber, by the way. It's an aircraft that registered 1/1000th of the radar signature of the next best that had ever been designed.
Yep.
And at Lockheed Martin, at Skunkworks, they called it the Hopeless Diamond. That was the internal name because everyone was convinced this thing had no hope of flying. And actually, one of the head aeronautical engineers joked, somewhat jokingly said, Dennis Overhauser should be burned at the stake because I have slide rules older than this kid.
Yeah.
And what does he not know what flies, right? And you know what? It's true. It's technically true that the stealth bomber is unstable, not on one axis, not on two axes, but on all three axes. It's unstable.
Interesting.
So if the world doesn't change, that means it can't fly. Now, that's in the same time period that computer stabilization was coming into being. And all of a sudden, stability, the definition of what makes for stable is changing. And the conventional paradigm of what makes for airworthy is changing. And so you end up with this radical innovation, but it had to come from somebody who was, you could say, unfamiliar with prior art, right? And the challenge for a lot of folks is you rise through ranks of the organization and your credibility is built upon your expertise. And where the challengers and where the disruptors usually come from is someone who's questioning a fundamental premise. What if unstable is okay? And there's tons of examples of breakthroughs coming from basically somebody with a novice's mindset. And so for a lot of leaders, the question is, am I the kind of leader that a young person or that it can have a stupid idea with? If stupid ideas aren't safe around me, we have no hope of innovating.
Well, every innovative idea starts off stupid, right? Like Copernicus said, no, we're not the center of the universe. And all of a sudden, he's got problems.
Totally.
Right? He pissed off a lot of people.
Favorite examples. Yeah, absolutely.
It's the best, right? It's like,
it is funny. Like the line between crazy and genius is so thin, right? Yeah. Like, everybody's crazy until they do it. And then they become genius.
One of my favorite examples too, just historically, is I think Lord Kepler. He was, I think it's Lord Kepler, whoever it is, he's presenting at the kind of Worldwide Association of Physicists in 1900. This is 4 or 5 years before Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, right? It's like major breakthroughs. And he proclaimed from the stage, the only thing left for physics is more precise measurement. There remains nothing left for physics to do. Is
right.
The world leading authority
in 1900.
Prior to E equals mc squared, prior to general relativity, prior to like foundational theories now that have changed how we understand the world as we know it. And the world leading expert at the time says there's nothing left to know.
So crazy. Okay. So I want to get more into innovation, but now I want to go back. What got you started? How did you get into Stanford? And what started this curiosity?
Well, I think, how did I get in? It was an admissions oversight.
We also need to know your SAT score.
For real?
I don't even know my SAT score.
Okay.
But my background, I'm in finance. I was a management consultant, doing kind of very conventional management consulting kinds of things. I had my heart set on moving into economic development. When I was in college, I had spent a summer in Bolivia setting up an accelerator for a university there. Before going to business school, I spent a summer in Zambia working at an AIDS orphanage. And my heart was really set on doing economic development. I decided, because I hated my management consulting job so much, I decided to sign up for 2 more years of it following business school, because that's, the smart thing to do. And which gave me kind of very much kind of a free summer, so to speak. Whereas a lot of folks in business school got to use that middle summer as it's got to be their pivot moment. For me, I could be more entrepreneurial, little bit more liberal in my search. So I ended up at a startup in Delhi, India, just outside of Delhi, in Noida, India, doing solar lighting. And I'm, spreadsheet monkeying. I love a pivot table as much as anybody else. Even to this day, I'm in recovery. My name is Jeremy. And while I was there are these amazing designers building these revolutionary products for people in poverty. And I didn't know about design as an approach to the world, as a worldview, as a problem-solving methodology. I knew about design. My wife's a fashion designer, so I knew about design as like a capital D kind of design, not like this lowercase d way of viewing the world. And that summer in India really changed my life. And so I came back to Stanford, that second year of business school, thinking, I'm going to take every class I can at the design school just to learn about this stuff. And ultimately, it ended up derailing my life. And what was supposed to be kind of a 1-year faculty extension ended up being, 14 years of teaching graduate students and professionals, basically.
That's so cool.
So for people like Jason who don't understand the concept of design, why don't you go into that a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
You strike me as someone who doesn't get it, Jason. No, design. I mean, the fundamental premise of design is basically put the human being who you're seeking to innovate for at the center of your work. Understand them deeply, care about them. I mean, imagine this: actually care. Care about a person who you're designing for. It could be your client or your, whatever that might be. And then generate an enormous volume of ideas fueled by this sense of care and passion you have for this person and their problems. And then rather than kind of deciding on which one's the best, admit you probably don't know and try a bunch of stuff in a scrappy and low resolution and low cost and high velocity a manner as possible with the people for whom you're designing in order to determine which of your directions is worthy of further investment of time, resources, et cetera. So it's like a very rapidly iterative, high empathy, high divergent thinking where collaboration, diverse perspectives are valued. And, a lot of people can think in terms of a sprint. They go, okay, let's do all of those things in tight sequence. And now let's all get back to our jobs. And what my belief is that there's actually, it can imbue your life, and these mindsets and these orientations can be something that becomes a part of your existence, not just a part of a product development cycle, but actually a part of your existence. So that's really the premise of Ideaflow. Is innovation is not an event, it's a practice. And despite being overhyped to the nth degree, it remains yet undercultivated as an individual competency and as a team-based capability. And so we are seeking to create a change in organizations where folks actually, just like they monitor their, FICO score, or just like they monitor their BMI or their hoop, sleep score or their steps, they're as mindful of their creative health as they are other aspects of their health.
It's crazy. Two things that can be very hard for a business owner is to be highly empathetic of either our team or our customers, clients, right? Because you get so involved with the daily business stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it's just like, how can we have, what tools can help us get there? And then the other one is following up on that one is the idea of being okay with a bunch of failure, right? It feels horrible. A lot of times innovation is terrifying in our own business because it's like you're watching the dollars. It's kind of back to that whole empathy thing with our clients and our team. It's like you get so in this box that you're like scared to try stuff, and you create a culture of that, don't fail, instead of like, let's try stuff, let's innovate.
Yeah. I think the trying stuff is really critical, and recognizing the world is changing so quickly, and it's as Darwin says, right? It's not the strongest or the fittest, but it's the one that's most adaptable to change that survives. And so having that sense of adaptability, that if we're not changing, if we're not progressing, we're probably regressing, and creating rewards and incentives and a culture that appreciates experiment. As Jeff Bezos said, failure and invention are inseparable twins. I love that expression. If we're trying to make something, we're going to fail. That's part and parcel of the even the scientific method, right? The hypothesis-driven testing. You're going to fail a lot of times, and that's fine. In science, it's not failure, it's learning, and it's refining the hypothesis. In terms of your question around empathy, I mean, one of the things that we teach people to do is, it sounds crazy, but it's go where your customers are, talk to your customers, and don't have an agenda per se, but be willing to be surprised and allow them to take you in unexpected directions. Like one of my favorite stories, one of my, now teaching partners, Kelly Garrett Ziegler, KGZ is what we call her. She's an amazing woman, amazing designer who was at Vans, and now she's at Pearson. But she told the story of the time she was at Mattel, and she said they wanted to create a product for parks. And their goal was, we want to create something that families take out into the world, maybe to playgrounds, and kind of because you're always looking for ways to expand your footprint of your product. And they've got kind of Hot Wheels and things like that. They're in the living room, they're in the bedroom, but man, what if they get in the park? And she said that we started talking to parents in their homes, and we were asking them about, when do they feel relief? When do they feel like they're able to let their kids explore? And she said, for whatever reason, we ended up in the bathroom over and over and over again. We're in the bathroom because the bathroom's actually the place where finally, when a kid's in the bathtub, mom and dad can chill. And it's actually not at the park. And so Kelly said, all of a sudden, we have this huge, it's like we could either insist on, no, we've mocked up some outdoor designs, or we could say, like, what can we do in the bathroom?
I love it.
And because if it's actually about, one of their kind of design directives was creating more bandwidth in the life of a parent and engaging a child, how do we extend bath time in a way that gives space to parents, right? And so they allowed themselves to kind of be taken off track, if you will. Another example, just because I think it's something, if you're not interacting with the customer and you're not trying something with the customer, you're never going to learn this stuff, right? So foundational thing is you got to interact with them. You got to try stuff with them. But then the question is, are you so married to or wedded to your idea that you can't hear, disconfirming evidence, in which case you're toast? Or are you holding it loosely and you go, well, take me off road? Like my friend Philippe runs the innovation lab at Michelin, and he said they wanted to get into kind of off-road space, tires, and they had this really cool prototype where basically, folks who go off-roading need to adjust their tire pressure. And he said, we had this really cool kind of, remote control thing, like you could just pop it in, into the dashboard display and it would adjust your tire pressure. And he said, what we learned is people actually enjoy needing to be the guy who's got to get out and kind of like, and like relieve the pressure. Like there's something about the tactile experience that was really satisfying to them. So he said, we had built this technology, but it didn't really matter. But he said, one of the things we started hearing over and over again was they feel like they don't know where the best trails are. And they're kind of on trails that other people are already off-roading, but their skills are kind of going beyond this trail. And they ended up in this space where they're developing a product where basically you unlock the ability to discover new terrain as you improve your ability. It's got very little to do with automated kind of tire inflation or deflation, but it's true to where the user is taking them.
Yeah.
Right? But again, they're putting themselves in front of the user, trying something. I would argue they would never have discovered the trail opportunity if they hadn't been attempting with the tire deflating opportunity, right? But if you're not willing to allow your vision to kind of go off the rails, you're never going to discover the real opportunities.
Yeah. And I think the way that it's set up, you become with bigger companies, right? Like as the expert advances, they're going to be more set in their ways because it's what got them there. Yeah. Right. So there's that bias and they don't want to hear it. Oh, that's more work, man. I already did all the work. I want to sit up here and collect my freaking
and we already know how to deflate tires, but like, what do we know about trail? Like,
right.
Let's just try to find somebody who wants their tires deflated. Right. Because we already know how to do that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's not do something new. Let's just do the thing that we're doing and find the right people. Yeah. No,
exactly. Exactly.
But there are people, we already have them. Like it's one of my
favorite, just while we're talking about Philippe, shout out to Philippe. If you hear this, by the way, you're an insurance dude, Philippe.
You are.
One of the things that he said that I really love is he said, his lab, if you think about getting back to this question about failure as well, Jason, he said, one of the primary services his innovation lab offers the organization is they kill things cheaply. He said that the organizational instinct is to spend a lot of money on something that ultimately doesn't work. And one of the really great things they do is they learn quickly and cheaply. We shouldn't fund that. He said that, and that's everybody appreciates failing for $100,000 rather than $1 million. That's great. He said the problem is a lot of times, like an executive will come with $1 billion Post-it, right? They've got like this one. This is the $1 billion idea.
Right. Yeah.
He said we will show them empirically that's not $1 billion idea. And he said the problem is that's my only Post-it.
Right.
And so how do you build that sense of we got loads of other possibilities. What we need to do is churn through them quickly, not just put all of our eggs in this one Post-it basket and really hope it's the right one.
It's very similar to the concept of MVP, right? Minimal viable product. This is like minimal viable idea. And you just bring as many as possible because then you're going to be able to funnel them into the minimal viable product.
Yeah, we were inspired by this research by his name's Dr. Dean Keith Simonton out of UC Davis. And one of the things that he studied breakthrough thinking across disciplines, across domains, across geographies and time periods. And what he found was the single greatest determinant of the quality of your ideas is actually the quantity of your ideas. So if you want better ideas, you need more. And very few people are thinking in terms of quantity. So here's a fun example. Jerry Utley is he was a assistant to the late great Ansel Adams, the American photographer. And Utley teaches photography at the University of Florida. And he'll divide his class in half. He says, okay, you want to get an A at the end of the semester, and everybody does, right? To half of the class, he says, you've got to turn in a truly world-class photograph. I'm going to bring in a distinguished jury of my photography peers. They're going to evaluate the quality of your work. And to get an A, you got to have a spectacular photo. Ooh. To the other half, he says, okay, quality doesn't matter, but I'm going to count. It's about tonnage. I'm going to count how many photos you take. And if you take over 100 photos in a semester, you get an A. It doesn't matter how bad they are. If you take over 90, you get a B, et cetera, et cetera. And then he brings in the jury. But importantly, the jury is blind to the condition. They don't know that. Ooh, so the jury is evaluating the quality of the photos, all of them. And the thing that shocks the jury, and it shocks students too, it doesn't shock Utley because he's seen it for so long.
Yeah.
The students whose job it is to get an A can't do it. No A's are awarded. The students whose job is to turn in a bunch of photos get lots of A's. And it's going back to this Dean Keith Simonton stuff. As Eisenhower said, I think quantity has a quality all its own. And
I like
when you start to orient around quantity, you end up generating much better ideas. But how you approach the market and collaborators and everything and problems changes a lot when you think in terms of volume rather than quality.
I love that, because how do you get good at anything? You do reps.
Yeah,
that's just it.
Exactly.
You don't buy 10 leads, you buy 100 leads because everything.